All right, well, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and start with today's webinar, Building Tomorrow's Education Coalition, Why Cross-Sector Policy Leadership Matters for Student Success. We're excited to welcome you to this event. We are recording today, so if you have to step out or would like to share this conversation with others later, that recording will be shared after the session. I'm Nicole Mann. I am the Alliance Engagement Director for the Midwest region here at Complete College America, and I will be your facilitator today. I'd like to take a second to introduce our panelists. We have Commissioner Dennis Olson from the Minnesota Office of Higher Education, Deputy Commissioner for Academic and Student Affairs for the North Dakota University System, Lisa Johnson, and Dr. Dan Worry, founder and president of Early Childhood Policy Solutions. We'd also like to acknowledge that this webinar was developed in collaboration with the Minnesota P20 Education Partnership, who are substantial contributors to our conversation today and fantastic partners to work with all around in advancing our work in the area of P20 partnership. Before we jump into the good part and engage with our panelists, I'd like to share a little bit of information about Complete College America. CCA is a bold national advocate for increasing college completion rates and closing institutional performance gaps. And the majority of that work happens with our state, system, and institutional partners. Our goal is to scale highly effective structural reforms and promote policies that improve student success, leading to social and economic mobility for all students across the CCA Alliance. The CCA Alliance itself is a collection of 53 state and system partners who have all committed to doing the work of student success together, to using one another as resources and participating in active engagement in that work as part of their role in being the CCA Alliance. Ultimately, what CCA wants to see happen is a future where all learners graduate, and they graduate in a timely manner because the system is built for them. That higher education's pathways, institutions, and state systems are designed to support them and to lead them through to the outcomes that they value. Cross-sector partnership is critical in this mission and vision of what higher education can be across the CCA Alliance. As we look to who higher education is serving, we see that over 80% of high school students say they plan to attend college, but only 12% describe themselves as very prepared to do so as they approach graduation. We're also seeing that first-year enrollment continues to be on the rise, and the strongest gains are in students ages 21 and older. So we're seeing that both in the traditional age fresh out of high school group and the post-traditional group who have entered the workforce previously, there is interest in re-engaging with the higher education system and in making changes to how they approach their educational growth. Cross-sector partnership is critical to ensuring that colleges are ready to engage with both of these student groups and lead them towards their goals. Legislators agree that higher education is a key factor in ensuring that students enter the workforce successfully and continue to experience social and economic mobility. 47 states in just 2023 enacted policies affecting college and career pathways. So there is recognition that these two groups of students are colliding in a different kind of way than they have in the past. However, our structures for addressing those new ways of engaging with students haven't necessarily kept up. Many of the traditional P20 councils that had formed have gone dormant, and the ones that exist now continue to be strained by funding challenges, political polarization, and capacity constraints. When we look towards what's still working in the P20 model, Minnesota, Kentucky, and North Carolina are all among the states that are leading the way in renewed approaches to P20 alignment. Today's conversation looks at a few different perspectives on how that's happening, not just in these states, but across the country. How is cross-sector leadership showing up to engage with today's student and to prepare with a long-term view? Not just what do we do at the touch points, but what's happening before the student has ever been exposed to college? What is happening after they've moved past high school and are starting to think about their career in a functional way? How do we all work together to ensure that students have their best chance of meeting their goals? The first perspective on that will come from Commissioner Dennis Olson from the Minnesota Office of Higher Education, who will share a little bit about himself and state perspectives on partnership. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. Really appreciate that. For those who I haven't met yet, and it's so nice to see all the applause and the thumbs up coming in the chat. Almost feels like we're in a room together, especially seeing so many familiar names and faces of partners here in Minnesota as well as outside. It's really a great opportunity to highlight some of our work. I wanted to mention for the Office of Higher Education, I've had the opportunity here to serve in this capacity as commissioner for about 7.5 years now, serving in the governor's cabinet. And one of our key priorities is to work on an interagency basis. And I know that's easy to say, but really difficult to put into practice. And we found here in Minnesota that key opportunity really lies within the work that our P20 partnership has been able to provide for us, not just for our agency being the higher ed agency, but also in close partnership with our K-12 agency, the Minnesota Department of Education, as well as our workforce agency, the Department of Employment and Economic Development, but also other partners like our Department of Labor and Industry, as well as our newly formed agency that oversees early childhood education, as well as programs and services for children and families, the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. They have all been able to come together in partnership through the P20. And I say it often that we're so fortunate to have in Minnesota a formalized structure of a state statute that mandates that P20 partnership really exist. The authors of the original statute were key in that development and really that understanding that P20 has a unique place and space to fill. And so, the legislative intent of the legislature and the original authors was to really codify that partnership and that formal relationship between our agencies in state law. And so, we're really fortunate here in Minnesota to have that partnership, and happy to continue to expand, Nicole. If that's what you're looking for, I can go on there, but that would be kind of my key message there, is that state and formal partnership through our state statute has been critical.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson, and we will dive into that deeper here in a few moments. Next up, I'd like to invite Deputy Commissioner Lisa Johnson to introduce herself and share a little bit about the work that is happening in North Dakota around cross-sector partnership.
Great. Thank you, Nicole. And again, I appreciate the invitation to share our work in this space with the group. I'm just checking, make sure I'm mindful of your time. Like many of the individuals on this call, we continually face the daunting task with limited human resources to facilitate outreach to our K-12 partners and support for the workforce needs in our state. And our greatest workforce needs are like many of the occupations that you experience in your state or region. You know, it's healthcare, education, manufacturing, and many others. Like many of you, we have about 150 occupations on our in-demand list. But we realize that our post-secondary institutions really are uniquely situated between those two spaces, between those exiting K-12 students and the employers that will hire them. And we know that each of them sort of have a sphere of internal and external constituents. So the K-12 partners have counselors, teachers, administrators, parents, that are in their sphere, in the workforce sphere, as anyone or everyone ranging from the governor's office, the Commerce, the Workforce Development Council's job service, industry associations, the individual employers that comprise that space. And so, it's really in this unique space that post-secondary institutions sit, where there's increasing pressure that in addition to providing relevant educational programs and ultimately well-trained graduates, we really can help make connections among the initiatives and the efforts that are provided by those K-12 and those workforce constituents that I sort of summarized before. And Nicole, if you didn't mind pulling up the one slide that I submitted, I'm not unpacking each of these statements, but really the purpose was to show how the North Dakota University system played a role in further connecting the constituents and their initiatives, programs, and outreach to advance each of these 5 objectives. So again, they're not necessarily the degrees or in-demand degrees, but our peripheral role in communicating clear outcomes on the career opportunities and earnings for those students, coaching, whether that's human or the use of technology to help students through guided pathways. Always on our radar is the affordability, making sure that cost is not a barrier for the students. And then work-based learning experiences ranging from paid internships, apprenticeships, and other experiences, even at our colleges and universities. And then lastly, the employer alignment. And I apologize for the background on this slide. I realized in hindsight that the slide design looks more like it's evidence from forensic files, evidence. Seeing it on screen, I'm like, oh, I could have done better than that. If these points look familiar to you, they're actually taken from Strata's framework, the State Opportunity Index. Our state was probably one of the later ones to sign on. Your state maybe has already done some work in this space, but these 5 objectives really resonated with us in our state. Again, it's not that we haven't done work in these areas, but I could tell you assuredly we haven't done anything in a highly coordinated manner that linked all of these indicators leading to student success, originally with their K-12 partners and culminating with employment in in-demand occupations until now. And because I have just a minute or two left, I'll just advance a little further, and I think all of us will expand on our work in this space. But the key was with limited staffing, and I'm guessing we're just like your state or system. The ability to add staff to take on these initiatives is very limited. State agencies are not, at least in our state, aren't really encouraged to grow. It's sort of work with what you have. So we are looking for solutions that were, not labor intensive, the use of technology, seeking efficiencies for everyone involved. So the students, the K-12, the counselors, my staff, me and my time, and for employers. And so with the help of grant funding, this isn't a plug for any agency or organization, but we received some grant funding from the Midwestern Higher Ed Compact that we belong to. And we were able to tap into a statewide application or a platform. It's called Compass. And again, I'm not here to promote that as a vendor or product, but that really was already in use in our K-12 system and had some employers in that space. So we joined that platform that then, through our participation, enabled them to expand the career exploration, populate and promote the in-demand educational pathways beyond those that just culminated in career and technical education fields. So a wider swath, which brought in more employers, and the opportunity to bring in tailored sources of financial support and scholarships for the students, increase the employers in this space, and at present, we're well over 800 employers that are populating this space with their profiles for students to explore co-ops, clinicals, internships, and other job shadowing experiences. So I'll pause there. and we can talk more about challenges and opportunities from our participation in this.
Thank you, Lisa. And our final panelist today, last but not least for sure, is Dr. Dan Worry, the CEO of Early Childhood Policy Solutions. When we initially started kicking around ideas for this webinar and chatting with Minnesota P20 Partnership, we wanted to look for who's being left out of this conversation. What voices haven't already had the opportunity to engage in these kinds of spaces? And Dr. Worry came right up to the top. So I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work.
Nicole, thank you so much. I want to, really begin by just thanking you and CCA for the invitation to be here. And I actually, as you sort of reference, mean that in a couple of different ways. I'm, certainly thrilled on a personal level to be here, but I'm maybe even more excited that CCA has chosen to include the field of early childhood education in this conversation. I have to say, I speak about early childhood a lot. I don't think I have ever been invited by a higher ed organization, so it's exciting to be a part of this conversation. And this sort of question of cradle to career education pipeline really gets to kind of the heart of the work that I have been writing about in recent years, which is to say that, for the better part of 100 years, we have envisioned education and early childhood as this sort of false dichotomy, right? That on one hand, we have this place that we hold in great reverence where children begin at age 5 or increasingly at age 4 as pre-kindergarten has expanded, and we call that place school. But for very young children, that we have something that I think policymakers and the public often envision as something lesser, right? That when we call that daycare or childcare. That we understand that dichotomy is a false one. It's one that we understand better than we ever have in the history of humankind. That this idea that there's a learning environment on one hand and sort of a safekeeping environment for young children on the other really is not the case. Sometimes you'll hear policymakers set out the goal that we want children to come to kindergarten, quote, ready to learn, as though kindergarten is where learning begins. And what we know with increasing clarity and confidence from some amazing research that's being done in the field of child development is that even to say that learning begins at day one is a little bit of a misnomer. In fact, we know now that learning begins in earnest in utero at this point, and in particular in the third trimester as our senses become activated. That we know, for example, that even in utero, that young children are able to distinguish the voice of their mother as opposed to the voice of a stranger, and that they are able to distinguish and prefer the rhythms and the patterns of their mother's native language over that of a foreign language. So we know that children come into the world learning in a way that I think really challenges the way that we have kind of thought of the P20 continuum, if you will. Frequently, when you hear P20, the P stands for preschool or for pre-kindergarten, when in reality it should probably stand for prenatal. And so the implications here are really massive in terms of not only children's success early in life, but as they approach college and career readiness as well. We know that the fundamental architecture of the brain is wired certainly before the age of 5, but primarily in the first 12 months of life, which makes this an awfully important conversation. So it is fantastic to have early childhood represented in a conversation like this.
Thank you to all of our panelists for introducing yourself to our CCA Alliance community. And now I'd love to ask you a few questions to kick things off. For our guests today, please feel free to start queuing your questions in the chat. And once we've finished the initial questions, we will open that up to go through the questions in the chat with our panelists and also accept additional questions using your raise hand down in the React at the bottom of your screen. So to start, I'd like to initially direct this question to Commissioner Olson. As you mentioned, Minnesota's P20 education partnership is written into statute, which isn't true in all states. So what are your thoughts about the value of a formal state coordinated partnership organization leading this type of work?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. It's a great question. And, there's a reason why I teased it at the beginning in my introduction, and it's because it really, outlines all of the work that our P20 partnership is expected to do in terms of delivering outcomes and recommendations. But really the value to me as an agency leader is, frankly, invaluable. We've had a statute on the books since 2009, so for quite a while. And I had mentioned, it was an intentional policy decision by the legislature to have a statewide partnership to ensure that one exists with specific goals and with specific outcomes, and really to kind of formalize these intentional relationships, these intended relationships, not only between various state agencies, many that I mentioned in my introduction, but also relationships between other organizations, community organizations, educational leadership organizations, the legislature themselves. All of that's spelled out in the statute, and I think it gives us an appropriate roadmap for really the work that we're expected to carry out. And for me, really, as an agency leader, it helps me to vocalize that this isn't just something that is an individual agency responsibility or an individual agency initiative, or maybe a political priority depending on who's in leadership, and one that can kind of be set aside on a whim. This is really a formal structure expected to be in place. And so we really appreciate that. But, I will say historically, since 2009, it's been a long way to find our sea legs, really. And it wasn't until pretty recently that we started to kind of figure out, what this thing should really look like and what it should really do. And that came with hiring staff. I'll get to that in a second, but the current staff and leadership of the P20 has focused their work on something I've absolutely fallen in love with. They've been calling it, work at the seams of education, and I just love that framing. But we've been asking all of us, agency leaders, as well as all of our partners at the table, what does really working at the seams do? What is it? What need does it fill? And to be honest, we're still exploring that a little bit, but we've come to understand that really this is the work and coordination that's needed. It's sometimes, an example would be a couple of agencies getting together where, one of us says, maybe this isn't within our authority. I'll find out who can maybe take it from here. And we're finding out that the entity that can take it from here or figure out kind of where best to coordinate between us is the P20 partnership. And so, we've found kind of throughout the years that it's more than just kind of sharing or regurgitating info that we already know to each other. All of our members, including the leaders on the P20, are volunteers. And so we want to focus on what isn't redundant, what is yet to do, what are the places where we can all contribute. And that's been critically important recently. And I want to call out, Nicole, one of your early slides, intro slides, mentioned something from the Education Strategy Group about all of the P20s that have maybe been established historically that have since kind of folded up shop, or have kind of closed, have kind of moved on from that initial vision. And that's because really there wasn't this framework in place. And so one, I just again want to call out the importance of having a statute. But we've also discovered, like I just mentioned, that consistent leadership and actually staff capacity has been important as of late. We're kind of understanding now that about 3 years ago we brought on staff, and we have leaders that sit as an executive committee, but it's really the staff that have been able to drive us forward, because this leadership committee, this executive committee, is folks like agency commissioners, agency leaders like myself, deputy commissioners, presidents of university systems, chancellors, senior system representatives. And while all that is important to demonstrate unity and power and really buy-in, it's the staff that are really, taking the work to the next level and making sure that we're able to move forward. So for me, as an agency leader, we're talking about all of the partners we should engage, all of the community organizations that we should engage, all of the NGOs, and even all of the legislators. But having the time and ability to do that, in addition to all of the other responsibilities of our jobs, has proven incredibly difficult. And so being able to have, consistent leaders and staff within the P20 partnership, has just been able to, allow us to take that to the next level. And then one final thing I will mention that's really important about our statute, because I think I mentioned, we don't want this to become something that can just kind of blow with political winds as they may. The statute specifies that we have not only legislative representation, but that legislative representation is bipartisan and bicameral as well. And so we make sure that we have, Democrats as well as Republicans from both our House of Representatives as well as our Senate on the committee, able to inform priorities, able to take issues of importance back to their legislative colleagues, and really make sure that all voices, political as well as outside of the legislature, are appropriately represented. So if there's anything I can draw in terms of, having a formalized key statute, that would be one of the most important pieces, because we can do all of this on our own, with partners, but to be able to have that legislative support has been incredibly important and critical as well.
Hearing you share about that intentionality piece being so critical, it's not just about having something on the books, but having someone who's charged with nurturing that work, having the right voices in the room to understand that work deeply and to communicate that work. And I suspect that's one of the reasons that Minnesota's partnership has been able to continue moving that work forward. Would you or any of the other panelists like to add anything on that topic?
I think the only thing I would add is that, you absolutely nailed it. I think, having that language there and having the right folks at the table, has been the only reason, because we've watched, so many of our other state partners, kind of lose that support and that ability to kind of take it to the next level. And, thankfully we've had the right recipe here in Minnesota. So would certainly advocate, for that, for those who are maybe looking for a structure to emulate.
Thank you. I know there are multiple conversations going on in the states that I engage with about what it might look like to bring a formal partnership in. And I think those points will be well received and helpful. Now, another area I'd love to dive more into is the shifting of the narrative around partnership. And directing at you, Lisa, traditionally higher ed has tended to skew towards focus on K-12 or focus on workforce as a primary driver at any given time. But the work that you've been doing in North Dakota strongly suggests that higher ed can serve as an integrated through line between K-12 and workforce. But that's a lot of work and a lot of different moving parts. So can you share a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities in taking that through line approach?
Yes. And, and I was kind of reflecting on Dennis's comments, and I understand why they do that as a state, a much more populated, a densely populated state. And, and I think North Dakota operates quite a bit sort of outside legislative statutes. And so sometimes just the agencies get together and decide there's something they want to do. And sometimes this just happens organically. So it's sort of a different approach. And, the composition of your state kind of is whether that's supportive or not. Our challenges, so obviously the answer is, are we skewing towards K-12 or workforce or both? And obviously the answer is we're both. We're supporting both. As I mentioned in the introduction, we're at the intersection of that. Our challenges, no surprise, are certainly staffing. I mentioned it before, really to kind of coordinate statewide efforts. So it's kind of utilizing the resources you have. But one observation is that uncoordinated efforts lead to sort of siloed portals, especially if you're looking for something like us, a technology tool. It creates, with the fear of personal identity and safety, we have siloed portals, multiple logins, and sometimes the inability to easily, for students to move among the types of information that they may be interested in viewing. So kind of back to, our solution was a platform. It was not terribly expensive. It's like $240,000 for 11 public colleges and universities to participate, and so, I mean, not saying 240 is not a lot of money, but I thought of it as a bit of a kind of a high stakes pilot. If we can demonstrate that we have 2 to 3 years worth of data and testimonials and improved educational and workforce outcomes in hand, we can present that to the legislature to request funding on an ongoing basis. But the opportunities that it affords, really, this platform that we use, it helped to have some grant funding, some seed money for this. But what was helpful is, again, sitting at the intersection of these multiple agencies, is K-12 was already populating this solution. And it was developed for North Dakota's K-12. And it was originally developed for K-12 to partner for CTE work-based learning opportunities. That was its whole purpose in the beginning. So they were already populating for all their high school students the courses they were taking, their interests, their hobbies. It included a personality assessment. And then K-12 was additionally using it to support if your state has this, the 4-year rolling plan for advising purposes. And seriously, like, what college or university wouldn't want to know this information about a potential incoming student without having to start from scratch? So certainly we wanted in on that. The platform had already sort of seamlessly linked information and pertinent data to existing other agencies. So again, multi-agencies who had supported career exploration and populated that database, like from job service records, into our state longitudinal data system. So this platform now took the K-12 student interests, job service, career exploration, and other agencies that kind of career exploration is their wheelhouse. And now with the university system entrance and participation in it, students who are familiar with Compass now can continue using that through their college experience now to see, again, kind of assess industry earnings, job demand forecasts, state scholarships. So now you can present, because it's tailored to them, we can present state scholarship opportunities that are in the field of interest and not bombarding them with the clutter of every opportunity available to them, but tailored on these interests, this inventory that we know about them. And same with the career pathways. So I think Dan would be happy to know that early childhood education is one of the early pathways, starting in dual credit and stopping out where they want, but progressing all the way to a master's or doctoral degree if they chose to do so. Another opportunity is the platform developer kind of is in its infancy. Actually, I would say I think some Minnesota schools have purchased it, but because it's in its infancy, we have a lot of hand-holding for our institutions. They've done demonstrations on campus. They help them through the steps of onboarding. And I mention that because I don't have to do it, and I don't have the staff to help them onboard with that. So the developer was helpful in that. And then in working with them, developed a survey of like, what would you like to see the application or the platform do? And I was just looking at that this morning. The feedback's incredible. The school feedback was they felt we had, no surprise, fragmented systems, heavy resilience on individual relationships, and placing students into internships, practicums, co-ops, but not really a tool or platform for students to sort of find that in a single location. It says weak visibility into career interests, employer fatigue and coordination gaps. And what they meant by employer fatigue, and I started thinking about this, like how true. If all of our 11 public colleges and universities are hitting up employers to have this one-on-one relationship and post-job opportunities, like that is very fatiguing, especially to small employers. Maybe large employers have the bandwidth to do that. But the ability to put their profile and their job opportunities into a single location. So 250 high schools and 11 public colleges and universities at another 10 or 11, private and tribal colleges can view those opportunities, gives everyone sort of equal opportunity to find those as opposed to just a relationship me of 30 years has with the community or a larger audience. So I thought that was kind of an interesting observation. Some of our colleges will now be running their, for example, clinicals through the platform. So students can go out and find a clinical location or an employer of their choice, and then developing tracking and reporting functionality in the tool as well. So returning back to where I started from, those 5 objectives, this tool enables us to provide clear outcomes. And that's an area that we're really concentrating on in higher ed is better information out there on wage records. That's something we've really struggled with. So that's maybe where we're concentrating our limited resources. The coaching using this tool, whether it's a K-12 advisor, college advisors, or self-advising for students navigating this on their own. Again, going back to that affordability piece, that not only could students see their potential wage earnings, but can also view sources of financial support, many of which are not solely needs-based. So we have things like career builders, much like other states who have free community college programs. That's what that is. And then work-based learning, just in particular, we know that research has indicated that paid work-based learning experiences are definitely associated with higher post-completion earnings and the increased probability of securing college level job. And then lastly, that employer alignment piece, that was the 5th one, that employers see a reliable pipeline of graduates and are participating in getting their information out there as opposed to just managing and curating an ever-evolving listserv of college and career or K-12 counselors to promote their career or their job opportunities. And frankly, I find this work to be exhilarating. It's organic and maybe a step back away from our more formal P20 committees and councils that we've organized. But because it's organic, what we're really doing is supporting people's work and connecting them in a way that we're not asking anybody to step back or to shutter their work, but really bringing it into the fold and making that easier for students and employers to access.
So one of the things that I know resonated for me both today and in previous conversations we've had about this work is the way that it is responsive to how students perceive their goals, the way that they think about what kind of work they want to do and incorporating that way of thinking into the type of work that's happening. And I think that's important to a lot of, I know our higher ed partners, that there's room to flex and to adjust for individual student needs. And I'm seeing that show up in this approach in some really exciting ways. So I appreciate you sharing some of that with us. Right. Now, to shift gears just a little bit, I'd like to ask Dr. Worry a little bit about the early childhood sector's voice. This is a sector that's frequently been left out of college to career conversations, as we touched on earlier. And I see opportunities for that to change. So how do you see early childhood agencies and practitioners most effectively being integrated into these conversations? Maybe from both sides, how can they join this conversation proactively, and how can higher ed and workforce reach out to them and include them in those conversations and in those early decisions?
Yeah, I see this, from a couple of different angles. I mean, I think, the guidance that I would give to all of you here today, primarily as, leaders in the higher ed space, is one, just the invitation to be at the table. is awfully important. So being deliberate about including the early childhood sector is a great place to start. The other thing though that I would, my personal appeal to all of you is that not only is it important, and can you play a role in uplifting the early childhood sector by bringing them to the table, but you can play a really important role in sort of honoring this group as the important educators that they are, and that all too frequently that is not the case. It was sort of depressing, Nicole, during I saw this a lot during COVID in particular, as K-12 teachers were sort of uh, unfortunately, I think in a position of having to sort of defend the value of their own work. I saw so many times on social media and in op-eds and things, teachers saying, well, I'm a teacher, I'm not a babysitter. Right. And that is very much the perception in a lot of cases of those who work in the early childhood sector. If you look at, we know that teaching isn't a get rich quick scheme, but the median pay of infant toddler teachers in this country is $13.22 an hour, which, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, is currently 59 cents an hour less than we pay dog walkers, right? And so during, precisely the most, critical, formative period of early development, that we have a workforce that is so abysmally paid and respected that we see estimates of up to 40% of them leaving the field every year. It's fascinating. I was in Winnipeg, Canada, not terribly long ago, speaking to a group that I had been told were going to be mostly teachers, and so I just sort of asking them. Getting a sense of who was in the room, I asked them to raise their hand if they were teachers. Not a single hand went up. And what it came down to was not that there weren't teachers in the room. It was that I had used the word teacher, right? And that we tend to reserve that for folks that are working in K-12 or in higher ed, and we have terms like daycare worker or early childhood practitioner that stand in the place there. And so I think it's important again, for those of you who are in the conversation today, not only to give thought to bringing this workforce to the table, but really helping to change that narrative around who they are and what they do. I say this really lovingly and with no disrespect intended, as both a former public school teacher and school district administrator. But I think there is a case to be made that infant teachers may, in a lot of ways, be even more important teachers than our third grade teachers, than our seventh grade teachers, than our high school teachers. Not because of any lack of value on their part, but just because of the incredibly consequential, formative window during which they are working with kids in ways that, ultimately will go on to fuel your success in higher ed, the success of K-12 settings. I mean, the list goes on and on. So I think, that there's an important opportunity not only to bring them to the table, but to really, societally help to change the narrative around the value, not just of the early years, but of the adults who work with children during that time frame.
Thank you so much for adding that perspective, Dan. And we have some great questions coming into the chat, so I'd like to go ahead and address some of those and open up for any additional questions we're able to make time for today. The first of those is from Eric. How do we align with one tool for statewide platforms? He referenced that his agency, MDE, has a tool, but we see other agencies wanting to create their own. Have any of you run into some solutions for that, or has that been a persistent problem for you as well?
Sorry, Nicole, it took me a minute to get off mute. So I know one of the things we'd like to do in post-secondary is better educational pathways. And I just happen to be and this is where it's beneficial to sit on boards or some sort of advisory group to other agencies. But I'd heard that the CTE folks had mapped educational pathways, but they sort of culminated stopping short of any post-secondary work. But the truth is, people in CTE pathways may go on for an associate or want to do management and manage people in these spaces. And so instead of reinventing the wheel or competing with their educational pathways, I just said, say, could we start with your educational pathways? Would you be interested if we help sort of a continuation of educational pathways? So it wasn't about yours versus mine, but could I use yours as the foundation of mine to build on? And then I think that's helpful for students because these are going to all look different if we develop them in isolation. And so the pathways are confusing and it may even appear to be competing if we don't design them with some consistency.
And that communication piece is a sort of a cross-cutting theme across our cross-agency partnerships is how do we get the information in front of each other? How do we find out what other people are using and see if we can find integration points instead of competition points? And in a related question, and something I think that Eric may have been hitting on in mentioning software platforms, is the data collection and integration struggle, which John brought up in the comments. There's data collection and integration struggle with wage and occupation, not just employment sector information. So who has solutions for that? So as we look at those interconnected themes of software and data collection, I'd open this up to our panelists, but also to our other participants in the room. What are we seeing as potential solutions for bridging knowledge gaps?
Well, we're relatively new into the data collection on wage records or geographic location outside of that of our own state. So I'm interested in any participants. One thing that I've heard other states say is sometimes institutions or agency wants a particular vendor because you're portrayed favorably. And I think there's a danger, and if you start using different vendor, it's just hard to do apples to apples if you're using different vendors to do wage or geographic location. So I do think there's value in sort of picking one that we're all going to live with. That makes me nervous, the picking and choosing when you're trying to roll up from a system lens, when you're trying to roll that up singularly on behalf of an entire state.
Commissioner Olson, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on the integration of systems and of data and of software, because I know this is the million-dollar question that I hear across multiple types of student success work is how do we get everything to talk to each other? What have you noticed from a state perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. And maybe this will inspire a couple of others on the webinar here. I know that may have a better answer than I, but can't pass up the opportunity to do a little bit of cheerleading for our statewide longitudinal educational data systems, as well as our early childhood complementary data system as well. We're incredibly fortunate here in Minnesota to have such a strong system, which I know has helped inform some of the framework for systems in other states. And I know it was mentioned in the chat too. Lisa, I believe you had mentioned engaging with PSEO, the Census Bureau's employment outcomes. We're diving pretty deep into that work in Minnesota too. And Nicole, you're right. It is $1 million question. I mean, it's even come up recently as we've now worked with a handful of other agencies, including our governor's workforce development board and the governor's office, to implement actually just today opening up the window in Minnesota here for applications for workforce Pell Grant eligibility. And all of the new eligibility thresholds and wage earning or earnings tests that have to be met. We're looking at on-demand and in-demand programs, specific industries and related wage outcomes. All of that has, begged another question. Do we build yet another new in-house system? Do we rely on a vendor? Is it going to talk to both our K-12 and higher ed and industry partners? All of those things have been on the table for quite a long time. And yeah, I mean, Eric's point is well taken. Software, developers and kind of their different tools and products often, are a barrier, and looking for kind of that sweet spot is tough.
Thank you for that. We have another question. Josiah says, I'd love to hear any advice the panelists have on what they think makes the most compelling argument to education and policy leaders when it comes to securing their buy-in for authentic, transformative, cross-sector work. So
Maybe
how
I
do we
can.
make the case?
Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
No, I
Yeah.
was just going to say, we're working closely with with governors, with state lawmakers here in recent years. I think no one wants to see systems that are siloed and disjointed, and so I think it's a very should be a relatively easy bipartisan case in a lot of ways to make that cross-sector work that improves the efficiency of the system, is a great thing. I can tell you, and to this question of the data systems, it's sometimes a little bit difficult in early childhood where the system is a little bit more of an organic ecosystem where we have private child care and home-based the programs and parenting programs, and the list goes on. Not necessarily programs that are all offered in the public sector even. And so sometimes that is a challenge that helps to prevent us from getting the kind of strong data from the early years that these systems really would benefit from. But I do think, to Josiah's question, I haven't met a lot of policymakers who aren't excited by the idea of a system working more cohesively and in less of a kind of a disjointed, siloed way. I think there's a great case to be made there.
I think we have time for one more question, and there's still a few rolling in, so I suspect that's a good problem to have. That shows the importance and relevance of this conversation. We'll ask one more, and please feel free to continue conversing about this in the chat as we wrap up. But Dara indicated he'd be interested in hearing thoughts on how we can move from passion-driven, volunteer-based efforts to a model of sustained, strategic, long-term investment, because this may be one of the greatest challenges that they're experiencing going forward. So how do we move closer to that intentional coordination?
Nicole, maybe I'll just jump in quick with an example because it's very recent in my mind. We just wrapped up our state legislative session just a couple of weeks ago here in Minnesota, and it built for 5 months, and actually, during the session, but even well before that, laying the groundwork for an appropriation, a statewide appropriation to support our P20 partnership. And we were actually also looking for the partnership to lead some very specific and necessary work around reestablishing our statewide attainment goal. We set an attainment goal in 2015 and expired in 2025. 49 states across the nation had an attainment goal at one point or still do. Ours expired, and we wanted to transition that attainment goal from being solely a higher ed attainment goal to really an education attainment goal, understanding that attainment disparities and educational disparities overall don't start when a student walks in on the first day on campus. They are, of course, well informed by work that happens in the early childhood space and in elementary, middle, high school, and then even these gaps, these disparities transition into workforce disparities as well. And so we wanted an overall education attainment goal. The entity that just made natural sense was the P20 partnership. And so, we're hoping while we laid the groundwork this year for a sustainable and predictable legislative appropriation for the P20 partnership to help lead not only that attainment work, but all of the other necessary work that I talked about, those seams. That's really the key that we see. I mean, it's incredibly difficult to have to cobble together soft money and other resources that aren't dedicated. So to that question, it's a perfect one because we see that here in Minnesota as the absolute necessary and logical next step.
Well, we are in our final few minutes, so I would like to take a moment to thank once again our panelists today and also our partner in developing this conversation, the Minnesota P20 Education Partnership. I'm delighted at the conversation that started here today. It sounds like it's one that it makes a lot of sense for us to continue. A lot of pieces that we could dig more deeply into. So I would be remiss if I didn't encourage you to join us at the CCA annual convening this December and continue these conversations there. It's an important part of the work of student success and of bridging gaps in social and economic mobility for all students. So we'd love to see you there, hear your voices represented. The link is in the chat. We close today. Thank you all for participating. You'll receive an email with information on accessing this recording, and feel free to respond to me with any additional questions, suggestions, or ideas you have for continuing this conversation. I'll leave the room open for just a few more minutes for those who are scanning the chat or grabbing links. But thank you all for joining us, and I hope to see you again at a future CCA conversation.